Well, thank you, everybody. And this session that we're talking about today is called investing in our patients or investing in our profession. And I've been asked to speak, and I'd love to speak on the topic of innovations in healthcare. So just thank you, Stan, for the background. But my background is really as an ophthalmologist working in a small country in Africa called Swaziland. It's pretty much a one-man show, a little bit like what John has just spoken to us about. And after those two wonderful presentations that we've heard this morning, I feel very much like this is a very minor part to play. But at the same time, innovation is not such a minor part to play, and I'm sure you'll agree as we go through this. Firstly, I want to show you the clip of this video. So I hope it comes out in the soundtrack. But I'm going to show you something here which maybe you've seen before. It's quite available on the internet. Could you give it a press? Could you get us going?
So Harold Ridley was the first ophthalmologist to implant an intraocular lens. This video, shot in 1951, shows an extracapsular cataract extraction with implantation of a Perspex lens made by the English company Rayner. This was pioneering surgery for its day, not considered to be acceptable by every member of the establishment at that time, but groundbreaking and the forerunner of all modern cataract surgery. The mature lens here is being expressed. The next step in the operation is to irrigate the remaining lens fragments out of the eye, and then implantation of the Perspex lens into the eye. The first time there's a bit of a ping as the lens is lost. Second time it's more successful, and although it seems crude by today's standard, a pioneering procedure by a pioneering surgeon.
Did you notice that lens going ping there? There's no haptics to hold on to, and I wonder how many lenses Dr. Harold Ridley had to go through before he got that one in. But there you've just seen a clip of Dr. Harold Ridley's first groundbreaking work with intraocular lenses. So I think you know this picture. He's a gentleman who passed away a few years ago. His history was one of an ophthalmologist working with the RAF, and in his practice he noticed, as you probably all know the story, and I don't need to repeat it too much, but he did notice that Perspex from shattered glass windows from fighter pilots and RAF pilots embedded in the eye was not a serious consequence. Obviously they may have lost their eyes, but the Perspex itself was inert. And he did that funny thing of taking that bit of information and taking it into the IRL that we know today. Now perhaps you don't know a lot about Harold Ridley, but whilst he was with the British military services in 1941, he spent some time in, I think it was Gabon, or perhaps it was Gambia, I think, as a British medical officer, and he wrote some of the first pictures that we know today about onchocerciasis. He described the disease. He took photographs. He did paintings of the underside of the eye, of the eyelid, and in fact he was the first researcher into this. And so I'm going to talk a little bit today about why we need to innovate. And each one of us, I was just saying to someone this morning, I really believe that to be a balanced clinician, one needs to have a three-legged pot. I'm not sure if you know, but in most parts of the world where they cook on open fires, they have these three-legged stands or pots, a real missionary pot. And they've got 3 legs. And the one leg, I believe, for us as ophthalmologists is going to be excellent clinical practice. The other leg has got to be training. And your third leg should be innovation and research. And that makes for a balanced career and a balanced clinician. So let's look at the heart of creativity. And we've got a great precedent here, haven't we? Because we heard those words, it was very good. And what I love about the Genesis story is that man was invited to go and explore this creation together with God. And he said, look, this is an animal. What do you want to call it? So he said, I'll call it a zebra. And what is this red fruit? I'll call it an apple. So I'm called to investigate and name his creation. Isn't that a wonderful thought? And that is still true today. And we also know that design is intelligent. And lastly, science flourishes under the audit of creativity. Science does not flourish in fatalism, where fatalism just says that, well, that's the way it is, and it's not my right to explore it because it's a chaotic world out there. The ancestors are changing the furniture, and I am just a pawn in their path. And if any one of you have worked in the field, that's the perspective you gather. It's hard for science to come out of a fatalistic culture for those very reasons. In a Judeo-Christian culture, science flourishes because we're invited to take part in that. And that leads me to the next point, that as a result of God creating man in his own image, I can also create things after his heart. What a wonderful invitation that is to each one of us. And this plays into so many parts of our life. Without creativity, you're going to burn out. And for those of you who are working long hours with great queues of patients and incredible demands and stresses on your time, you need to factor in a piece of creativity, because this is going to keep you alive. This is going to keep you there. This is going to keep you loving what you're doing. And so our need to create is not just for ourselves. It's not just to create wealth. It's not only to create new science, but it's to create that all may benefit. It's not just to get our name on a paper either. And finally, as I've found out, necessity is the great mother of invention. And so there's a picture that one of my residents came up with of how do you keep that pig eye straight under the teaching microscope. And we tried all sorts of things. We tried bits of, you know how you peg it down onto styrofoam. Has anyone been there? It sort of moves around, and you put a pin in it, and it just moves. So we got a potato, and we made a Mr. Potato Eye, and I think that works pretty well. Let's just go through some triggers to innovation. What makes you want to trigger? And I'm quoting Tim Castell, who is a researcher in Australia in these areas. And some of these business ideas, I will give you that, but they do apply to us in medicine. And the first thing is fear. The fear that everything's going to collapse upon me if I can't come up with something pretty quickly to sort out the problem that I have. The next one is fantasy. And the fantasy is, how about we change this? And that leads to the next level, which will be, the last one is, it's not working. What if I had to do something a little bit different? And these are the basic triggers that really got me. And I just like to think about, beg your pardon, let's go back. When I like to think about some of the innovations that I've taken and you have taken, you might find they would be part of this. I'll just go through one. The fear that I won't manage to finish the list of patients that are lined up for me in OR today. How do I get past this slow, sluggish procession of patients in and out of the OR? You know what I mean? The slow cleaning up between cases, the incredible ability of your staff members to wander off and have a break, and then you've got to. It's like each time you start a new patient, it's like you're starting a new day, and the fear that I've got 20 or 30 cases, and I've got to get home tonight, and what do I do? That's a terrible fear welling up into you. What if we had to streamline this? And I'll show you something. And then the frustration of saying, it doesn't work. It's not going the way I thought. I wish I didn't start this, but how about? And on you go. So let's go for the skills to develop. And by the way, that is the picture of one of those lenses that you saw going ping there. Can you imagine how far he got that far? Let's forgive him for not putting little haptics on that IRL. Someone else had to do that, and that in itself is another lesson which we'll come to. I think to be an innovator and to enjoy innovation, one needs to have a wide interest, or cultivate a wide interest in areas outside of your precise field, so that you've got something to draw on, not just blinkered within what you know. And I guess we could say that Ridley had that. He had an experience in onchocerciasis, in military medicine, and so he was able to develop that. Secondly, the powers of observation. And thanks. And I think this is something which I remember my father telling me. He drilled this in, and perhaps observation, some people have it and some people don't. And I don't know how to do it if you don't, I'm sorry to say. But my father would say to me, why do you think that lorry is loaded like that? And we go on a ride. Or, what do you think's behind those tarpaulins on that lorry? Or why do you think that farmer put his fence posts 1.5 meters apart and not 3? Or whatever the question is. I don't know. Well, think about it. Let's look at let's observe, and let's make some deduction. Let's start thinking about it. And I think we need to develop that in our children. So all those dads out there, don't just put on the DVD when you drive from wherever you're driving back. So who's going back? David, are you taking all the kids back to Michigan? Take the CD off and ask them those sorts of questions. An association, so there you've got the two. The observation links up with the interest in weird circuitry. How did you go from injured airmen with blind eyes, destroyed eyes, in a horrible victims of warfare, to such a groundbreaking thing, whereas before aphakia was just the norm? How did you get there? That's an association skill, which I think that's where the spark is. And that's the one I don't understand. I can't tell you about that. I don't know it. But I had a suspicion that that's where God is involved. And I suspect that, how can you get the little cell with the cell wall and the mitochondria and suddenly fire it up and make it alive? And that's that little link. That's the creativity. That's where God comes in. Obviously problem solving, because once you have an idea like an intraocular lens, it needed quite a lot more work, as you can see. And with Ridley, there was a great deal of inertia. I'm not sure if you realize, but it wasn't just a success story. His first lens was implanted in 1951. But it took another 10 years before his colleagues even stopped criticizing him. He actually stopped doing it for a while. It took another 20 years before he was, or 30 years before he was knighted. He's only knighted in the 1980s. And they printed a stamp in Britain with Ridley on in somewhere in the 1980s. That's a long time of overcoming inertia. Then lastly, they pretty much go all together. And the last thing which has to happen with all innovation is that you have to collaborate. Ultimately, Binkhorst came to his rescue, didn't he? And Fedorov, is that right? The Russian gentleman who helped develop it further. So it got taken by someone else, but the initial idea had started. And 5 common business mistakes, okay, the business I said, is an over-reliance on pilot initiatives and brainstorming. Yeah, I think you can see that that can be unhealthy, because it's seen to be as a solution for everything. Charismatic examples that it works with, there you go. The big one at the moment is, well, how did Steve Jobs do it? Misapplication of other approaches. Then obviously when things fail, the cycle of self-recrimination, and finally resignation to small and inconsequential superficial changes, which was not what you intended. And I'd put to that, not making mistakes. We don't want to make, we want to be seen to be perfect in our first run, and that's not possible. So what are the risks? Well, there's a picture. Maybe you know that picture already, but does anyone tell me what that is? Any ideas? I'll put you out of your misery. It's a camera. Anything else? It's got a sort of a taped on the one side and some electronics. This is Kodak's first attempt at a digital camera. That is what they put together. They got that far, and this was in the 1970s. But guess what their mistake was? they didn't take the risks. They didn't develop it further because they decided to stay with film, and that's where it stayed, and it took someone else to take that technology. And right now, I hope anyone's not got Kodak stocks, but I don't know what they're doing, but they're not doing digital cameras very well. Next picture. Has anyone seen this picture? This is a lovely picture. Let's think telephone. There's a telephone on the, what else can you see? A whole lot of gadgetry stuff. This is the prototype of the iPhone, what you're looking at here. So what is the difference between the Kodak's innovation in the 1970s and Apple's iPhone? And I think, looking at Ridley, how come we don't have the Ridley lens? Well, I guess he had poor outcomes. He had such serious corneal problems, and those little lenses spun around where they were. I don't know all the problems he had. Has anyone seen a person with a Ridley lens in the eye? Anyone has any experience with them? I'd love to talk to you about that if there was. The time that it took him a lot of time, and maybe he didn't have that time. He's an old man already. Well, we know Kodak's problem. They didn't follow through. Obviously, there's the risk that we have of IP theft, intellectual property theft, or loss of your copyright, and litigation associated with your new product because someone else wants to muscle in, or else it affects them in some way. And when you look at areas for innovation and eye care, there's just everywhere you look. There's your technique, there's design, there's process. In every single area, you can have a go at something, and I'm sure you are already in your practice. So I'd like to just go through again with you the fear. As I said, I've already explained this to you, so I'll go through it quite quickly. The fear that I had was the workload in my OR. And so we decided, let's build a little trolley, and there you go. That's a little trolley. We decided to design it locally. I had an engineer look at it. I gave him my ideas. And so what we were able to do was divide our OR into two sides, a left and a right, and with a theatre nurse and a sterilizer on the left and one on the right. The microscope simply swings from left to right as you go. And we have 4 trolleys like that. There's a blueprint of the trolley if anyone wants to see me. That's another thing about innovation and eye care. I think this should be free. And so this is a trolley which is like an operating gurney. The patient gets loaded outside the OR, gets prepped, and everything gets prepared for them. If it's an anesthetic that you want to do, you can do it outside. If it's you can even drape the person outside, and you simply wheel them into the sort of docking station, and bang, down comes a microscope, and you're straight into the next case. While you're busy on that case, the other side has been cleaned out and moved out. The patient is back into the recovery room, and the next patient is docking, and so on. And so you can get your turnaround time to practically seconds. And let's go to the fantasy things. What if? Let's go to the what ifs now. Here's a young man who found us, and he made a lot of money, I think, in the States, and he's got a lovely mind, and he decided, what if we use communication skills or cell phones? Because cell phones are ubiquitous all over the world. What if we use that as a potent tool? And so we developed out of that a mobile reminders appointment system. It doesn't involve text, which is expensive for us. It's a free service. Anyone can have a look at it. It's not available here in the States. We blocked it. And so we've developed over many years a free reminder thing. It gives a person a missed call. Isn't that amazing? By a robotic little computer which we've set up, and it gives them a missed call the morning before their appointment, the evening before their appointment, and the morning of their appointment. And in such a way allows our patients to feel that they are wanted, that we can streamline our services, and it allows us to make sure that our lists are full with patients that have actually been booked. And lastly, on the frustration, the medical records, the numbers of pages and files, remember that we are working in paper still. We've got a long way to go. And most African and third world or developing world iServices are drowning under paperwork. In fact, I call it the record's black hole, because you lose a record, and so therefore it just adds, it still gets filed, but it just makes retrieval of the next time even worse. And so you're living in this black hole of having to reissue new notes for people that you know you've seen before, but you've got to start again. So out of frustration, we decided to develop our own simple-based database, which has solved all those problems. And I'll leave this with you. Was it worth the risk? Is this worth the risk? Is this something which you and I should be doing? Working with the Lord, having ourselves be part of His heart. He's a creator. Look what's come out of a result of one man's innovation, one man hearing right, one man making that little association. Thank you very much.